Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Honey Industry Summit. Uh, it's been quite an eventful year, as we all know, but I'm very glad to have you all in attendance. This is usually the part where I would go around the room and ask people, were you at the first one we did at Blue Moon Brewery, or were you at the second one at Wincoop, or the third one that we did last year in Denver? And those were all great memories and great events because I love being able to interact with members of the honey industry. Unfortunately, we all know this year was impossible. So, but it's also kind of a positive spin on it because we have more people than ever attend this honey industry summit. I'm looking at the numbers now. Seems like there's a few stragglers, but it seems like we've got 61 people here, which normally for a honey industry summit we have anywhere from 25 to 30. So this is a really great opportunity for us to reach more members of the audience and talk about what's going on in the industry. So whenever we look about what's going on in the industry, we're here to talk about soup. Not really. Obviously, this is not the soup industry summit, but I find soup a very interesting marker for sort of how we set up today's conversation. If you look at packaged soup, it's up 28% this year, which is astronomical. And we all know why. It's due to COVID. The impact of COVID has had not only on the food industry, but specifically the honey industry has been monumental. And we're going to address that today, as well as looking forward to what 2022 look like and what all these years look like in the future, and how can we help the honey industry sell more honey. But like I said, unfortunately, we're not all in person, but it is something that we're very excited that we get to share this room. Now, a couple things that we're going to be addressing is everybody doesn't have a camera. You've probably all been on multiple meetings where everybody has a camera that you can see. Whenever you have 63 people, that can be a bit distracting. So we're not going to be able to see your faces today. But there is a question area for you to ask questions. We strongly encourage you ask questions throughout the event. You'll be able to type them in, remain anonymous if you'd like, and then we'll pose those to the panelists. I'll be moderating throughout the day, and we've got a great group of topics to talk about today, all focused on how shopping has changed, how consumers buy groceries has changed, and how consumers eat out at restaurants has changed. That's going to be a big part of today's topic, as well, talking a little bit about honey testing and then sharing with you some really interesting information we have from the recent consumer attitude and usage survey. So we've got a full day. If you want to know where to ask questions, as you can see on that screen, there's a little control panel you have, and there's an area for you to ask questions. We please encourage you to do this throughout the day so we can have as much of a dialogue as we can. If you have any questions or issues throughout this, please email Allison at brightlycreative.com. She's working the phones, she's working the computer, and she's here as an organizer. But if you have any difficulties, let us know. This is all new for everybody, not only for attendees, but all of us. I'm used to doing these in person, where you're worried about weather, you're worried about flight cancellations. This is a whole new thing where you're worried about internet going out and all these things. So it's a brave new world out there, but we think we're going to be able to get through this and really impart some great information. Sort of the goals for today's summit is threefold. The big goal is the goal that there's always been for the 3 years that we've been doing this. We're here to help you find opportunities and take advantage of opportunities to increase honey sales. Now, whether that's in the retail segment, the food service segment, commercial food and beverage segment, regardless of what that is, we're here to help you find ways to sell more honey. We're also here to strengthen the collective industry knowledge, because once the industry is more knowledgeable about what's going on in the food industry, in the beverage industry, in the restaurant industry, it obviously leads to a much stronger industry. And we're also going to sort of talk about how COVID has impacted the food industry, not only from a standpoint of what's happening now, but obviously of a standpoint of what's going to happen kind of down the road. So all these amazing things that are happening that we're going to kind of address today. We're going to get started with talking a little bit about what honey's like, not only on the retail side, but on the food and beverage side and on the food service side, and how it relates to COVID. Because this is obviously something that's very timely and is ever evolving. So we're going to bring out industry experts to really go over each of these things. And I'm going to start by bringing on Don, who's going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the retail segment.
All right, Keith, let's see if all this preparation is paying off. Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Ladoff with Fresh Smart Solutions, and I manage the retail programs for the National Honey Board. Wanted to share some of the key ways that COVID has impacted the retail channel during the year 2020. So let's look first at a subject closest to all of our hearts, honey sales. We know that honey volume at retail was trending off a bit heading into the end of last year. Nielsen had told us that volume sales were down 2.7% for the 52 weeks through the end of November. And yet, since early March, we've seen honey volume increase 46%. That's Nielsen's numbers for the 26 weeks ending September 5th. During that same period, overall grocery sales are up 9.2%. If you're interested, liquor sales are up 23%. We know from Keith that soup sales are up 28%. And as a home baker who couldn't find yeast for a number of weeks, yeast sales are up 143% so far this year. COVID's impact plays out across three core areas that affect the retail channel: consumer behaviors, retail operations, and shopping behaviors. First of all, the so-called corona coping has seen 2/3 of consumers reporting that they're cooking more at home and eating more meals at home with family. 88% of meals consumed at home with family at their peak, which led to one of my heroes, Jim Gaffigan, posting videos of his family eating dinner every week through the initial lockdown stage. It's also led to people looking for more ways to prepare these meals they're making at home. Good Housekeeping and Women's Day had reported that recipe searches on their website were up 227% in May over the prior year, showing that people are looking for different ways to feed the family. Consumers are looking for meals that are familiar and comforting, and they're making greater use of center store foods, items that, like Campbell's soup, store well and that they can stockpile. Humorous sidebar, Kraft reported that they'd seen a 56% increase in parents who were serving their kids macaroni and cheese for breakfast. Certainly a center aisle ingredient. However, more recently, we've seen studies talking about how consumers are swinging toward healthier meals, healthier food choices. One study said that 49% of shoppers reported that they were trying to eat more healthy foods. We're also seeing that consumers are seeking more functional ingredients in their meals to improve their health and to boost their immunity. That's on their mind as well. And also embracing purpose-driven brands that support the social causes that they care about. Retailers are feeling COVID's impact across their operations as well. Early on, many retailers temporarily boosted pay or gave out bonuses to keep their employees showing up. Many had also shortened hours to allow for restocking. Those supply chain issues have persisted, and a lot of shelves are still full of holes. I don't think it's quite as bad as this photo at the height of the panic buying, but I'll say even at the Aldi I shop at, there are times that the fresh meat case still has a lot of this going on in it. Manufacturers have also felt the impact, and they have narrowed down their own assortments to focus on best-selling items by abandoning some of those slower moving items. You've seen the announcements recently that Coca-Cola is discontinuing Tab, that they've walked away from Odwalla. Frito-Lay was not manufacturing products like lightly salted Lays or Tostitos multi-grain scoops, but that allows them to focus on giving the retailers the foods that are the fastest movers. It's also seen traditional grocery stores gaining share of food dollars as consumers have sought to make fewer trips and do more one-stop shopping. And that's impacted natural food and specialty retailers that have again lost sales to traditional grocery stores. And finally, retailers are somewhat challenged with a focus on low prices that's driven by some of the high unemployment and economic struggles that are occurring. And that is an impact that's likely to last long past the end of the pandemic. The shopping landscape has also been dramatically altered, and some of the shifts we're seeing are likely to become permanent. Shoppers are making fewer trips, but buying more each trip. One set of numbers I'd seen from August talked about shoppers making 11% fewer grocery shopping trips, but buying on average 6% more each trip. And that has led to behavior that's less about browsing and discovery and more focused on expediency, getting what's on their shopping list and getting the heck out of the store. It's also seen stock up trips becoming more common, where before the pandemic, the vast majority of meals were made with foods that had been bought either the same day or maybe one day previous. One study found that fully 2/3 of meal occasions were now being made with foods that had been purchased 3 days or more in advance, and a third with foods being purchased a week or more in advance. It's also seen shoppers turn to shelf-stable items to keep their pantry stocked. Spartan Nash, in a recent interview, reported strong gains in canned meat, soup, pasta and pasta sauce, boxed dinners, side dishes, even peanut butter. And it's also seen legacy brands benefiting while emerging brands have suffered. Shoppers are quite simply less willing to take a chance on lesser known products in this COVID environment. And then finally, online shopping. The growth of e-commerce has been nothing short of breathtaking. We've heard a number of times people repeating the phrase about online seeing 5 years or more of growth in the span of just a few months. But one report I saw was that online dollar sales in June of this year were 5 times greater than a year ago. A recent report from NPD talked about 40% of shoppers are buying some groceries online. That's up from 28% prior to the pandemic. The Hartman Group is a well-known and respected authority on consumer and shopper behavior, and they've been monitoring COVID's impact very closely. They recently published this infographic on COVID's impact that I thought I'd share with you. In it, they're reporting 5 in 6 shoppers, 84%, have adjusted how they shop for food due to COVID-19. 40% are talking about how they take special precautions at the store. 28% reported that they have consolidated their needs so they make fewer trips. 25% of shoppers talked about stocking up on essential items in case of another shortage. And 25% were saying that they're spending more on groceries now. But some of that is because of the shift from dining out and the decline in food service spending and resulting in more grocery spending. In another recent report from the Hartman Group, I thought they did a great job of summing up COVID's influence with these 4 key takeaways. The point they made is that the pandemic is impacting consumers' lives on all levels, ranging from those minor decisions about menial daily tasks all the way up through political and social views. But number one is that safety and protection from the virus are a top priority for consumers. Second is that sourcing food for the household is something they see as essential and unavoidable, but that consumers are constantly adjusting their food sourcing practices in response to takeaway number 1. Third is that given all this stress, consumers are turning to what's familiar to get a sense of comfort and security. This comfort is something they're finding through an increased reliance on trusted products, on trusted brands, and the retailers they get those products and brands from. And finally, that consumers are craving both comfort and familiarity, but they're also craving discovery and something to keep things new and fresh. So manufacturers and retailers both have opportunities to connect with consumers by leveraging these emotions and desires in their product selections, in their marketing, and in their promotion. So thanks, and now I'll hand it back over to Keith.
Thanks, Don. We're going to bring in now Andrea Shepke from Evans, Hardy & Young, and she's going to talk a little bit about what's going on the food service segment and how you can sort of, look at how COVID has obviously impacted that segment significantly. So she's going to come on and talk a little bit about that.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you virtually anyway. And I'm going to share an overview of kind of where the food service industry is at right now. And I know we've all kind of seen the impacts probably locally in terms of restaurants and all of that. But I'm here to kind of reassure you just off the top that the food service industry is definitely on a rebound. And there's some real opportunities and potential for Honey moving forward. So the National Restaurant Association going into this year had projected a record sales figure of $899 billion. So just astronomical spending at the restaurant space. And so we went in with great optimism. And of course, we were all thrown a curveball. And, several months in, we had restaurant closures across the country, varying degrees of limitations for food service operators. And of course, that means a lot for their supply chain in terms of impact. So 7 months in now to this new world that we're all navigating together, the National Restaurant Association is now projecting $659 billion in sales. So just to put it in perspective, while that's a huge loss of $240 billion in potential, when you look at it, it's actually back down to 2016 levels. So, it was a booming sector. all signs show that it will come back to where it was ultimately. And basically, if you look at it on a month-to-month basis, food service spending was at $65 million per month for the first 2 months of the year. Now it's down to $55 billion. So, decimated ultimately in the beginning, but the restaurants, as we'll talk about, they've shown a lot of innovation, and really honey is positioned almost really better than ever. You will see that there have been some sectors of food service that have been hit harder than others. If you're following this space at all, independent restaurants that didn't have the big chain backing, the big corporate kind of cushion, they of course have suffered the most. But there's been a lot of push, in terms of local areas to support independent restaurants. So there's a little bit of balance going on there. Fine dining restaurants, of course, without being able to have customers come sit in, they've been hit hard. And of course, for quick serve, QSR, the drive-throughs, etc., business is booming, and you've probably seen the long lines at some of your local restaurants. So another way to look at it, pre-pandemic, 51% of food service or food spending was at restaurants. So Americans were spending over half of their, food dollars at various restaurants. And now that number is at about 45%. Ultimately, the full recovery hinges on the economy and folks having, money in their pocket to spend. The other key really influence here is that it's incumbent on the restaurants to also ensure health and safety protocols. So, there's a lot of work being done on the restaurant side to make sure that they can stay in business and operate safely. That they know is very important to consumers. So in the meantime, there's been this pent-up demand for on-premise dining. So folks want to get back into restaurants when it is safe to do so. And in fact, a recent survey that the National Restaurant Association conducted in September showed that 71% of adults say they're not dining out as much as they would like. So we expect that once kind of the doors are all open, there will be this flood of activity. So it's been kind of inspiring, really, to watch the industry and how it has adapted. I guess as folks who are selling to them potentially, I think you can be assured that these are scrappy folks who are really making it happen and finding ways to keep serving customers, keep bringing revenue in. And of course, it might look a little different in terms of packaging, etc. The focus will be on delivery, to go, those sorts of things. So you may have kind of a change up in terms of how you deliver product, but things are definitely turning around. In fact, the Restaurant Business magazine reported that total restaurant sales increased 80% between April and August, and that just was the result of going from closure to reopenings. And overall, the pandemic has energized the entrepreneurial spirit of restaurant operators. So 5 reasons to be bullish on restaurants' future. This was simple, but we thought it really hit the nail on the head. A reporter from Restaurant Business in October said that there are 5 reasons to be bullish on restaurants' future. Consumers really like restaurants. They need restaurants. The industry now has a seat shortage. You may find this too if you've tried to dine out recently. Usually reservations are required, seating is limited, so demand is definitely pushing the boundaries of capacity. The industry has been super creative, and it's well positioned moving forward. But most important, I think, for us, of course, is that honey remains very well positioned within food service. We have seen reasons for great optimism in terms of honey and its appeal to both operators as well as consumers. Chefs are as excited about it as ever. And we find that the story of the health and sustainability positioning really is resonating with operators more than ever. So better for you, better for the planet, we have seen really has met this COVID crisis in the middle, and people are going to be drawn to honey because it has such a natural sourcing. The story behind it is so incredible. It's also a better for you alternative in terms of flavor ingredient and sweetener. We think that it's important to promote the fact that it's #1 sweetener. That's exciting news. I think we're going to go into that a little bit later. But also, just kind of looking at the headlines, right now, honey was called out as one of the popular ingredients of the season, even maybe more exciting than pumpkin everything, pumpkin spice. There was an article that pointed out the number of limited time offers that restaurants were running this fall that include honey. Here's just an example of some of the chains, which are going to be a very major target moving forward, just based on the sheer volume and also their ability to operate during these limited times. Chick-fil-A, Wendy's, and Carl's Jr. and Hardee's all have honey-inspired products running. As you'll see in these little snapshots, they're calling it out as a popular ingredient or as something that they think will attract consumers. We're also chatting with another very large chain that's planning on doing a hot honey promotion next year, and we're looking for ways that we can collaborate with them to really, kick up the buzz on that. Okay, and this is my last slide, but just to let you all know, we continue on the upward trajectory. This is 2020 data. And it shows that we continue on an upward trend. You'll see the blue line and the blue dot there. And then the red is the projected over the next 4 years, looking at a continued increase. So I think that despite the challenges at food service, there remain great opportunities. I think that the Honey Board's positioning of better for you, better for the planet is going to really resonate. And I think we're going to continue to see it on menus quite a bit. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea. And just so everybody knows, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on with food and beverage manufacturers, and then that'll give you an opportunity to write in any questions that you may have for Andrea, Don, or myself. So whenever I look at the impact of sort of COVID on food and beverage manufacturers, I really feel you have to view it from a time perspective. Because there was a lot of interesting things going on in the food and beverage industry that really impacted honey's usage pre-pandemic. Then a lot of things really happened in that March, April timeframe. And then, we're currently in this living with COVID-19 phase right now. And then we're also going to address a little bit about what next year looks like. Really pre-pandemic, the CPG sales, so food and beverage products, were really kind of on the decline. A couple of years ago was the first time that food service rose above food and beverage manufacturers as a primary source of food and sales. On the formulation side, we saw a lot of clean label push. This whole avoidance of sugar, which I know we're going to talk about quite a bit today, was really bearing down on all sweeteners, including honey. We also saw a lot of category bloat. Just in the beverage aisle alone, you saw products such as cactus water, watermelon water, all these weird sort of products that were trying to get a grip. And whenever we talk to manufacturers, what they were really concerned about pre-pandemic was kind of what you would expect, what has always been: cost of honey, adulteration, and how can I use it in a new product development. And I really think new product development is kind of the lifeblood of how we look at honey in long term in this industry, because that's an indication of its really relevance. Now, once COVID-19 came, that March, April timeframe really spun the food and beverage manufacturing industry into a tailspin. People were concerned about keeping plants open. There were shortages in staples. How do we produce food? How do we feed the country whenever we can't keep our plant open? So that was a main concern. But we also saw a big concern, which I thought was really interesting, from manufacturers in education. So right around that March, April timeframe, when things started really going sideways, we got more requests from food and beverage manufacturers to talk about honey than at any other time before that. So it was a really high in demand of people concerned with it. Now, since then, we've kind of gone in a couple different ways. Obviously, sales are booming right now, as I talked about at the beginning. 28% increase in packaged soup. So sales are booming with food and beverage manufacturers. But what I find really interesting is what they want. A lot of articles have been written about the trends towards more healthful products, more natural products, and I think we'll get there. But right now, consumers are really appealing to nostalgia and indulgence. And in terms of what manufacturers want, it's been a busier year for me than ever talking to food and beverage manufacturers. And they are kind of just as interested as I am about what's next. That's always the big thing. What's next? What we're also getting a lot of requests is for reformulation. This is an area that with the avoidance of sugar, there wasn't a lot of reformulation going on. People were just removing sugar. But one thing I think COVID has done is it opened up a lot of opportunities for honey in the food and beverage side that weren't there before, because people are looking at reformulating products. We also are getting more questions than ever before about how are the bees, which I think is really interesting, because I think people, because of COVID, has kind of looked and reframed the question of food based on shortages, supplies, things like that. Where we're going into the future, that's a question we're going to address throughout the course of the day, and I do have a little sneak peeks of where I think. But overall, the industry is doing really good from a standpoint of grocery sales are booming, which then benefits food and beverage manufacturers. But like I said, sales right now are great, but what does the future of the food and beverage industry look for? This was a study that was really good that was done by Matson, and what they looked at is kind of what product developers thought about new product development, both now and into the future. The good news is that 65% of companies are still working on developing new products. The bad news is obviously the flip side of that is that 35% have halted all new product development. 57% have delayed new product development, and 75% feel that COVID has caused them to rediscover established comfort brands they'd stopped buying. So this has been the one big area where we've seen a big shift. Pre-COVID, the outside of the supermarket, the perimeter was really finding success, the more fresh food. But since COVID, everything has moved to the center. So that's why you're seeing soup. That's why you're seeing packaged breads grow in sales. But I think whenever you look at what consumers want, whenever they ask product developers what consumers want, value is always going to be number one, especially now. Nostalgia and indulgence number two, but plant-based is number four. And I think that kind of gives us a look at what's going to happen in the future. I think a good reflection of what's going on the food and beverage side really comes from General Mills. I think this gives you a sneak peek. I talked to one of their head of R&Ds a couple weeks ago, and he made the comment that we're all working from home, so there's a lot of talk about new products, but not a lot of action. So what these big brands are doing are returning to those comfort foods with an eye on the future. We saw this specifically with General Mills whenever they re-released 4 of their cereals with a older formula. And if you look at one of those, Golden Grams, they made honey a big key component of it by calling it a retro recipe, honey is back. And I thought it was quite funny whenever I would go through their Instagram posts on this. A lot of consumers were very upset because they didn't know honey was gone in the first place. So if you look at a company like General Mills, they're looking more at it from a comfort standpoint of food, because the original Golden Grams had a cleaner ingredient label, fewer ingredients, but they're really promoting that honey notion, even though it sits a little far down on the ingredient listing that I like. But if you look at some of their other product launches happened this year, they're really kind of playing both bets. They're looking forward for the natural and healthy with a product like this Nature Valley Packed, which converts to the cereal product where honey was weighed down. Honey is the number 2 ingredient. So that's pretty massive whenever you think about the percentage of weight of that bar. And it's really right in our wheelhouse of where we're growing. But then honey also plays that line of being a comfort food, like these Lucky Charms honey clovers. So honey's really in a great position since whenever you look at new product development, because it really straddles both of those things. So whenever you talk about where we're going next, the obstacles are obviously going to be on keeping plants open. The focus of food and beverage manufacturers has narrowed because of this notion that they want to keep their plants open. They want to keep the supply chain movement, so they're not exploring new product development. You also have a notion where in-store promotions have been halted. And this was a really interesting case with this product that I think I talked about 2 years ago at the Honey Industry Summit. This is called the Bee Beverage. It is a product that was released by Anheuser-Busch 3 years ago now, and it is basically meat in a can. And they released it in test markets. Then they found out what consumers loved about the product, what they didn't like about the product. Then they kind of went and reformulated it and remarketed it. And they had a big plan to do a massive California and West Coast launch in the spring. And if that went well, then they were going to launch that product nationwide. They had brewed all this honey wine, which they changed the name to a honey wine spritzer, and instead of a honey alcoholic beverage, which it was called before. So they had made all this stuff. It was sitting in a warehouse ready to go, and that product was completely pulled because they couldn't do supermarket demos, which they felt they needed to sell a product like that. So that's really been a big obstacle, is these new products that push out of the comfort zone have really been struggling. Another obstacle is these emerging brands, which tend to use honey more. These are your brands that are just coming up more towards a clean label crowd. They've really taken a back seat as supermarkets have turned to big brands. In terms of where we're looking at about opportunities for product development, really that consumer preference shift is really right in Honey's wheelhouse. Not only from a standpoint of comfort and indulgence, which is going on now, but what's next, what consumers care about next, which may be more natural, more sustainability, more clean label products. Another huge opportunity is reformulations are back in play. We've gotten more questions about reformulations than I have in my 9 years of doing this. Everything from the beverage side to the bakery side to the food side. Consumers are realizing that once we get out of this, people are going to look at food in a different way, and it's time to get to work now. We're also seeing a lot of opening up of new categories, which I'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow, where traditional categories that have ignored honey over the past have all of a sudden become some of our hottest categories due to how people now are going to start thinking about food. So I showed this at the beginning, and I had big question marks at the end about sort of what we're dealing with living with COVID, where consumers are looking for more value, nostalgia, and indulgence. If I had to bet on what we're looking for afterwards, it's really going to kind of morph to where we were pre-COVID, but with more intensity. We're going to look at more functional foods, more foods that can be perceived as healthful or have a health halo. And there's also going to be a much greater concern about sustainability. I haven't bought the sustainability argument until about 2 years ago when it started making an impact with, I feel, food and beverage manufacturers. And now it's something that I see significantly in terms of where the industry is going to go. So that's kind of a little snapshot about what's going on. I'm going to ask Don and Andrea to come back on and activate their webcams so we can take some questions from the audience about sort of what's going on with the state of the industry. So we've got one food service question. Andrea, if you can hop on here. Okay, we got one for Don too. So I'll start with Don while Andrea hops on. Don, the question is how can the industry capitalize on the shift to online sales? How do we increase virtual shelf space as a honey industry?
Well, there's two slightly different questions there. In terms of capturing that shelf space, that's really about just getting the products available and increasing the relative sales of those products. There are some digital tools that are becoming very successful in the e-commerce space. Instacart, for example, allows you to boost your position on the page by investing in a program, and brands have seen dramatic paybacks to that, 11x, 20x increases in sales. So that's one way you can get more shelf space, is just increase your rate of sales with those e-commerce outlets. The other opportunity to keep in mind with e-commerce is the ability to tell a story, to elaborate in a way you never can in store. And I've had several brands really give me testimonials about the results they've seen from setting up an Amazon storefront that allows them to bring more content, make it readily available. People can click here to learn more about the brand, about the sourcing, about sustainability practices, et cetera. So those would be the key areas that I would suggest people keep in mind.
Perfect. Andre, I have a question for you. Can honey as a tabletop item sweetener make a return post-pandemic, or do you see the need being filled with portions as a more hygienic, safe option?
That is a great question. Yeah, I think our minds are all kind of in the direction that it will be more portion. I know that a lot of restaurants have taken everything off the table, if they even have a table at this point. So yeah, I think you're going to want to work with operators, talk to them, see what they're doing. But yeah, our expectation is that things are going to shift in terms of the way that you're going to want to supply the honey to them. Great question.
And then I received a question here. You said that you're seeing honey being utilized in the manufacture of products that haven't used it before. Are there any particular products or category where you see the most growth potential? I'll be talking a little bit more about this Thursday, but yeah, there are some specific categories. Things like sauces, dressings, condiments. Those are areas where have always been able to put in sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and the consumer didn't care about it that much. But consumers are starting to get concerned with it more. So we're seeing big opportunities on that. We're also seeing a lot of opportunities on frozen foods and entrees, things that packaged meals that are using more and more honey, whether it's a glaze as part of a sauce, something like that. Those are a couple big categories that we'll talk a little bit more about on Thursday. And Don, got another question for you. Projecting into 2021, is there evidence that the honey sales growth will continue, or will consumer consumption revert back to 2019 levels?
Well, somewhere implicit in that question is predicting when the pandemic will abate, and I won't guess at that, but all the retailers that I'm talking to are expecting the situation to continue through most or not all of 2021, and expectations would be that honey sales would continue at an elevated level year over year. Again, the advantages we have of playing into that need for comfort and familiarity, the need for lack of perishability, all of those things are in our favor. So I think the one thing to keep in mind is that element of discovery. How do we continue to give people new and wonderful ways to use honey that they buy at retail? But would certainly expect this. Don't know if we can keep up a 46% year-over-year pace, but still a strong increase in honey sales for 2021.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, we will wrap it up there. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Andrea, for giving us a little bit of insight into what's going on in each of these segments.